Hello, everybody. You're welcome to this webinar organized by Teacherton Foundation and the policy ISH. And today we're talking on this topic, Almajiri, actualizing child's education in Nigeria. So we have some wonderful discussants and panelists that are going to be taking us through this discussion this afternoon, or wherever you're joining us from. Maybe it's morning or it's evening on your side. You're welcome to this discussion. We know that out of school children is a challenge everywhere in the world, and Nigeria is no exception. So we want to talk about the Almajiri system. So I'm going to be bringing on the person that's going to anchor the discussion today. You're welcome, Oluwatosin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to you. So you bring in our other speakers. Thank you.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much, Mr. John. My name is Oluwatosi Adiko. I'm the director of ISS 51, Human Rights and Social Justice Initiative. For today's on Almajiri actualizing child's right to education in Nigeria, we have astute discussants who have at least distinguished themselves in the area of human rights protection in Nigeria, Africa, and the world at large. And first of all, the person that will be belling the cat will be Chairman Okolose. Chairman Okolose is a seasoned researcher and a writer, and is currently an LLD candidate and a DAT scholar at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. He has, done a lot of research in human rights protection and also which includes child protection as well. And the reason we are bringing him on board is because we trust, his research prowess in that area, and we know that we can actually learn from him in as regards the way forward, in actualizing the right to education of the Almajiri children in Nigeria. So, welcome, Mr. Chairman Okolese, to this discussion, and he will be in 10 minutes. Will be giving us some background information, the necessities that we need to know as regards actualizing the right to education of the Almajiri children in Nigeria. So, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Chairman Okolose, and I'm Nigerian. So I will be speaking very briefly about the Almajiri situation in Nigeria and how we can actually actualize the child's right to education in Nigeria. But before I proceed, I just want to say a big thank you to Tosin and every member of the team on that side for the invitation. I'm very, very happy to be here, and I hope that we can all learn from one another. So if you can kindly put up my presentation. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of my presentation. So I will be speaking for 10 minutes, and I'll be speaking on just a few main points, but I'll try to rush through the presentation just so that we can have time to engage with the participants. So I will be giving some context on the Almajiri education system in Nigeria. Like most of us know, the system is practiced primarily in the northern part of Nigeria and places like Niger Republic, Chad, and some other states in West Africa. In Senegal, they have something that's similar to the Almajiri system called the Talibes. I will speak on that subsequently. But more importantly, to ensure that this debate is informed. So I will definitely put up some statistics just to show what the information or data is saying. Then I will speak about the legal framework for the protection of the rights to education of children in Nigeria. I would speak about that framework within the context of the international made up of the UN and the regional, and the domestic, which is made up in the case of Nigeria of federal and state governments. Then I would speak about the legal, policy, administrative, and implementational gaps, and how, of course, we can address the Almajiri and out-of-school problem. Then I'll conclude. But before I proceed, I just want to offer us the benefit of what others are saying, particularly the news media, by showing us this 1 minute video. Can we please have the 1 minute video? All right, so while we're waiting for the video, okay.
Children are not orphans or homeless. In northern Nigeria, they are popularly known as Almajiris. The children told Channels Television that on a routine basis, they go out to beg for alms, feeding themselves and their guardians in some cases. An estimated 8 million northern children are engaged in the Almajiri system, an Islamic school system common in northern Nigeria, Chad, and Niger Republic. The idea behind the Almajiri system is to inculcate in the young children the culture of memorizing and reciting the Quran at an early stage. Children as young as 4 are sent by their parents in search of knowledge. Some of the children in this system usually sleep in their guardians' houses, often in very unpleasant conditions without parental visitation. Many Almajiris end up on the streets begging for alms, hawking, and other forms of child labor.
Thank you so much.
The Secretary General, an umbrella body of...
All right, so that video was just to give us a kind of brief overview of the Almajiri system. I know that it's not new knowledge for many Nigerians, but for those who might not be aware, I thought it would be wise to actually afford us the opportunity of just having a graphic image of what the Almajiri system is all about. But in the course of my presentation, I've also done well to provide pictures to depict how the system is run, and also in the course of my explanation, I will try to make it as graphic as possible. So the Almajiri system is an Islamic system of education, whereby children are sent to an Islamic scholar for the purpose of learning about the Quran and Islamic teachings. And some of the key features of this system is that parents give up their children for the purpose of that training. And that means that the Islamic scholar has, to a very large extent, huge control and influence over the mental and physical development of the kids. It also means that children as young as 4, there are reports that even they could be less than 4, are also given up in that case. So what that means is that at the most fragile and developmental stage of the kids, they are given to these Islamic teachers called malams for the purpose of learning the Quran. Now, over the course of the years, there's been a lot of stories of abuses, that goes on in the course of these trainings. So that's a challenge, and we're going to be talking about that in the course of the presentation as well. But I just wanted to highlight that the Almajiri system basically involves teaching of boys. So you have 3 categories of boys that are taught under the system. So you have the adult category called the Gadi. You have the adolescent category called the Titibiri, and you have the infant category. So we're looking at from age 4 to about 12. So I've put up some pictures there just to show you some of the conditions that these kids are exposed to. They're exposed to begging in the streets for purpose of survival, and there's been reports by international governmental and non-governmental organizations that these children are abused by being used for the economic benefit of their teachers. So that is something that has been coming up, and why the issue of the right to education has to be taken seriously. And going further, many scholars from northern Nigeria have actually highlighted the danger that the Almajiri system, if not properly regulated, can actually portend for the upbringing and growth of children in Nigeria. So I've highlighted two comments by prominent scholars from northern Nigeria and from northern Nigerian institutions. So one says that the Almajiri phenomenon represents one of the messy and wicked problems thwarting the policymakers' effort of addressing the problem of youth restiveness, disaffectedness, and insurgency in northern Nigeria. So that highlights some of the impacts or some of the impressions that we now have about the practice going on. And of course, the issue of insecurity has in many ways been linked to the training of kids that have actually had to go through the Almajiri system. So these are some of the social, economic, as well as societal problems that have been traced to the Almajiri system. But my point really is not to say that the Almajiri system is bad, no, because if you look at the essence of the Almajiri system, is actually to bring up kids in the knowledge of the Quran and in the knowledge of Islam, as well as in its virtues. So that is a positive thing in itself. But the problem now is the way the Malams have used the Almajiri educational system for their own benefit by exploiting kids. I will highlight some of the legal dimensions of this and what the legal consequences are for kids. But before going before getting to that point, I just want to highlight some of the statistics. Generally, the statistics on Nigeria doesn't look good at all. The United Nations Children's Fund, for example, says that 1 in every 5 children that's out of school is from Nigeria. So that is a very, very bad score for Nigeria, because what it means is that currently Nigeria has the largest number of out of school children in the world. Currently, the number is placed at 13.2 million children aged between 5 and 14 who are out of school. So 13 million, I've tried to scale that down. That is almost the equivalent of the entire populations of Botswana, Gambia, Namibia, Eswatini, and Lesotho. So we're looking at 13.2 million, more than the entire number of countries. So that's actually very troubling. And also, we are told by the statistics that only 61% of children between 6 and 11 years old regularly attend primary school in Nigeria. But I would actually show how we can disaggregate the data to show that prominently that problem is in the northern part of Nigeria, and it's not really reflective of the entirety of Nigeria. We're also shown that only 35.6% of children aged between 3 and 5 receive early childhood education. And of these numbers, in the northern part of Nigeria, particularly in the northeast, 47.7% of female children do not attend secondary school. I mean, sorry, only 47.7% of female children attend secondary school. So what that means is that more than 50% of female children do not have access to education in northern Nigeria, particularly in the northeast. And in the northwest, that number is also about 51%. So that doesn't look very good for Nigeria in any way, especially in terms of how we're trying to equip our young people to be able to respond to the effects of globalization and to be able to seize the opportunities that globalization affords us. The statistics also show that most of the kids are from 3 states, especially in the northeast: Borno State, Yobe State, Adamawa State, where Boko Haram has been having a field day in terms of its terrorism activities. And of course, the news media is awash with the recent kidnapping of over 300 boys from a school in Katsina, in Kankara. But just to buttress the point further on the gloomy outlook on out-of-school kids, I have kind of put forth the different statistics on the various geopolitical zones of Nigeria. But even though the statistics I'm providing is for 2008, I would also show the recent one. So I just want to take everyone along. So for example, the Southeast actually has the lowest out of school children in Nigeria. As of 2008, it was just 6% of the entire population that was out of school. The entire population of children aged between 7 to 14. So that's the lowest, and then followed by the South-South. So the South-South has a population of 7% of children aged between 7 to 14 years. So what that means is that it's not a good number, because whenever you have just one child out of school, that child has been denied an opportunity, and probably an opportunity of a lifetime. But the bottom line is that the fact that these regions of Nigeria that really tackling the issue of out-of-school children is a good thing. And also the Southwest as well, which has 8% of the population aged between 7 to 14 years of age. But then when you go to the North Central, you begin to see that the number significantly jumps to 22%. And in the Northeast, it's 51%. And in the Northwest, it's 53%. So what does this tell us? I've put the sources there of my data. It tells us that there is a fundamental disconnect between the policy of states in the southern part of Nigeria and the policies of states in the northern part of Nigeria with respect to out-of-school children. I've highlighted now in the graph shown on your screen the latest World Bank figures. So this is gotten from the World Bank's website, and this is the latest I could get. 2010 is far. It's about 10 years ago, but this is the best I can get right now. And you'll see that out-of-school children have grown from 28% in 2007 to 34% in 2010. Now, we're looking at the possibility of that number having grown further with the recent figure of 13.2 million people who are out of school. So that is challenging in itself, and it doesn't tell a good story about Nigeria. Now, what does the law say about Nigeria's obligation as a state with respect to its children? I'm going to identify 4 levels of law here, which I've already spoken about in the introduction. So I'm going to speak about the international normative framework. I'm going to speak about the regional normative framework, and by regional, I mean the African region. Then I'm going to talk about the national normative framework. At the national level, because Nigeria is a federation, you have the acts enacted by the federal government, and of course you have states which also have to enact their own laws for such a law enacted by the federal government to have an impact. So at the international level, you have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Articles 28 and 29 emphasize and affirm the right of every child to education. And the purpose of that education is for their physical and mental development. So the fundamental question is, do kids have a right? Does the right to education apply to the right to education in an Islamic system? I would say yes, it does apply, because the law does not say that the right to education must only be formal. However, there are minimum standards that have been incorporated into that law. So, for example, a child should be able to read and write in the official language of the country. So that would be, to some extent, formal education. In Nigeria, the official language is English. So if we're taking our children to religious schools where English is not the primary mode of instruction, then there's also an obligation on the part of the state to ensure that those kids are incorporated into the formal system of education. So that's very, very important. So Articles 28 and 29 essentially affirm the obligation of the Nigerian state to ensure that the right to education is guaranteed for children. I just want to mention, because I didn't put that in my PowerPoint presentation, but who essentially is a child? The child is anyone below the age of 18. So anyone, no matter how mature looking they are, that person will be considered a child if the person is below the age of 18. But I've also highlighted the general comment of the Committee on the Rights of the Child at the UN level, which says that Article 29 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child gives some quality dimension to the right to education, in the sense that it affirms the nature of the education that children should receive. That should be free, and it should be at least basic. So it should be free, should be basic. And as much as possible, it should be extended to the secondary and tertiary level, based on the resources of the state and based on an agenda to progressively realize those rights. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to breeze through the remainder of the normative framework. So at the African regional level, which is the African Union level, there is what is called the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. That treaty was adopted sometime in 1990, and more than 30 states have subscribed to the provisions of that treaty, I think. By virtue of Article 11, the right of the child is guaranteed. The right of the child is guaranteed. And secondly, by virtue of Article 4, it says that in all determinations affecting the child, the best interest of the child must be the primary consideration. You can also find a similar provision in Article 3 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. By virtue of the provision of Article 11, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child have affirmed that by virtue of Article 11 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, states have an obligation to comply with previously agreed budgetary targets for education. So you will see that the budgetary targets that Nigeria has for education is 9% of the GDP. So Nigeria actually has undertaken the Dakar Declaration to actually devote 9% of its GDP. Now, that undertaking is not only for the federal government. It also means that states are required for Nigeria to meet its international obligation as a federation. States also have to incorporate the obligations of the federal government, of the state, as of the country, which is that if Nigeria has signed abroad that it's going to commit 9%, it's not only the federal government that's bound by that provision. States must also comply by devoting at least 9% of their GDPs to the rights of the child. So I just want to quickly highlight a case that is very similar, like I've mentioned, to the Almajiri case. So there's a case called the Center for Human Rights, which is where I'm based, and Senegal. It's called the Talibes case. So the Talibes are the equivalent of Almajiris. And there was a case filed by our center against Senegal, challenging Senegal's lack of action to address the nuisance of child begging, which is also rampant in Nigeria, by the way. So I think there's a case we are filing as well against Nigeria before the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child on this same issue. But that is something to talk about another day because it's not yet finalized. So in this case, it was the Malams. It was not like it was Senegal that was using the kids. It was Malams having the same system. Senegal is predominantly an Islamic country. So the Malams would use kids to beg, kids that are supposed to be under their Islamic tutelage. So it became a menace that if you go through the streets of Dakar, you would see these kids all over, swamping your car, swamping you, and all that. So we had to institute an action, and the committee held, after hearing both sides, that Senegal had failed to exercise due diligence to regulate the activities of those imams exploiting kids, and that by allowing the exploitation of kids in violation of their rights under the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, Senegal had violated its international human rights obligations. So that was the finding, and that finding is very significant because it also has an impact on Nigeria's attitude towards the Almajiri situation right now. Just moving very quickly, at the national level, there is no particular provision under the Nigerian Constitution that guarantees the rights of children. But however, there is a directive principle of state policy that the state would devote its resources to ensuring that everyone has equal and adequate educational opportunities at all levels. And it says this right shall be devoted to the promotion and development of the child's personality, talents, mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. So it's a very lofty and well-crafted provision, but it's not a right. However, there is something that many activists in Nigeria, there's a law that many activists in Nigeria are not very conversant of, and that is the African Charter on the Rights, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights Ratification and Enforcement Act. It was an act that was incorporated by decree in 1984 or 1985, and it is a law in Nigeria. And Article 17, Sub-Article 1 of that act guarantees the right of every individual to education. This is many years before the adoption of the Child Rights Act, which is the primary legislation in Nigeria that protects the rights of children. Section 15 guarantees the rights of children, but the Child Rights Act is a federal statute. So it's not binding on Lagos State, it's not binding on Kano, it's not binding on other northern states. So what does this mean for children? What it means, Section 15 provides for free, compulsory, and universal basic education. And there's an act on the universal basic education that also consolidates on this provision. I don't want to dwell too much on that, but it also fundamentally emphasizes that parents and guardians, in this case malams, have a duty to ensure that children or their wards attend and complete primary and secondary education. So that's a fundamental provision as well. But I also want to highlight an aspect that affects female children, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. And that is that female children who get pregnant in the course of their education have a right to continue their education after they've dropped out. They have a right, and that's fundamental. And that where parents or a guardian fails to comply with the provisions of these, these provisions under the Child Rights Act, then there's the penalties. For a first offender, it is a remand or community service, or both. And for second offender, it is a fine or imprisonment, or both. And in the case of a third violation, it's also a fine or imprisonment, just that it gets higher along the way. So what are the gaps? Why is it that despite these laws that are applicable to Nigeria, as a state party to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, as a state party to the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, as haven't enacted the Children's Rights, the Child Rights Act, what are the policy gaps, really? So what the policy gaps I've mentioned is the issue of the federal system that we practice. So states are not really bound per se to comply with these laws. But I would say that it's arguable. But I think that the federal government needs to do particular things. So the federal government needs to incentivize states. The federal government is not doing a good job to incentivize states to domesticate, and that's the problem. The federal government as well is not meeting its 9% budgetary commitments to the right to education. And of course, the federal government is not providing adequate security. So even in states where you have schools where children are going to school, now they're being kidnapped. So there's going to be fear, and that's going to impact the willingness of children to even want to go to school. And even if there's a willingness, then there's no security, then that also jeopardizes their right of access to education. So these are the fundamental gaps in the system, and these are the problems that we need to address. So my contribution to this discussion, and I hope it's going to serve as a basis for enlightening the conversation, is that we need to adopt normative and institutional measures. Normative, especially at the state level. So by normative, I mean laws, policies at the state level, and even the local government level. That's often overlooked. We need to adopt laws at those levels, policies. Governors need to supervise the implementation of these policies. I will highlight, and it's not in my presentation, but the Edo State government, you must have heard through the Edo Best, has been really praised by even the World Economic Forum and the World Bank for the impact of that policy. And I think Nigerian, other Nigerian states need to look at that policy and what they're doing right. It's a computerized policy that ensures that the governor or the government is able to track the activities of teachers and the impact of their teaching on students' lives. They're also able to track the data and use that data to improve. And it's a system, of course, that's going to continue for some time. So that's something that I read about on in the website of the World Economic Forum and how it really works. And I think the Edo State government is not doing a good job selling the idea to other states. But I think that that's an area that states in Nigeria really need to collaborate. When a state, you see that there is best practice from a state on a particular issue, states should be humble enough to go to those states to learn. Many Nigerian states go to Lagos State to go learn, or we copy laws from Lagos State because Lagos has some of the best laws on particular issues. But I also think that in other areas where you feel like a government is excelling in the area of children's rights, then we also need to copy from them as well, and to ensure that the impact is widespread. Educational infrastructure. Some of the pictures you must have seen, and of course online, you'll see that the educational infrastructure is very poor. And that is problematic in itself. I've talked about incentivizing education, so incentivizing states, but we also need to incentivize children to go to school. I know in the Southeast, the reason why they're doing a very good job in terms of taking children away from the streets is because there was a time one of the governors was actually paying kids, especially the boy child, those people who just want to go learn work and make money, but the government thought that it was impacting their contribution to society and wanted them to at least get secondary education. So they were incentivizing these kids. I don't know if it was Rochas or the Anambra State governor, one of the Anambra State governors in the past. But that is also a very important way of incentivizing and improving the rights of children in the North. We need to incentivize kids to go to school, and there's nothing wrong with that. The school feeding program, which the federal government has been doing, is a good thing. I need to comment that, but I would tell you that I also have a lot of issues with the way the school feeding program is going, because you hear these huge sums that does not really translate to actual food on the plates. So it's possible, I don't know, that it's also a small screen for embezzlement. But I think that if it's given proper implementation, it would definitely impact on the rights of children to education in Nigeria. But the other angle of my contribution to this discourse is social-religious. The abuses cannot fall entirely on governments. The imams are citizens. The imams are human beings who, some of them are exploitative, not all of them. Some of them are exploitative and some of them are abusive. There's been reports of kids who are supposed to be learning the Quran being chained until they were discovered. So in other words, there's slavery, child slavery, forced labor going on, rape, child abuse. So there's just a lot of things that's wrong with the Almajiri system. And I actually think that it needs to be formalized and that imams need to be properly regulated. So I would like to on that note, leave the conversation here, and not to belabor the points, but also I would engage with other issues as they arise. Thank you so much. Tosin, I think you can proceed.
Hello, Tosin.
Tosin is mute.
Yeah, I think she has to unmute herself, maybe the network or something. But while we try to get her on, Mr. Chairman, that was a very good presentation, and you've actually done a really, really great job about the presentation on the issues all around. You gave a very good overview. While you were talking, some of our participants that came on, there's Nadia Sanchez from London, and she's into um, some charity work, and she's very much interested in this kind of topic and looking at what she should, how they want to go about doing some of those things in one of the northern countries. So Nadia, you're welcome. We really appreciate the fact that you're able to make it. So you could actually even post your question based on what Chairman has actually said. So Nadia, you could actually bring up questions and Chairman will be ready to respond to it. Also, we have Ibrahim from Zamfara State. He joined us, and while I wait for Tosin to actually come on, let me bring Yemi on, because Yemi should have some very important things to talk about now. Then we'll now go into the conversation. So
I'm very sure that can you hear me?
okay, yeah, Tosin is here, so you can take the
Okay,
floor.
very well. Thank you very much, Chairman Okolese. That was very insightful. And I love the fact that at least data, you use data to support your position, and very detailed. Thank you very much for that insightful moment. We'll still get back to you. But I just want to go to Yemi Fajirito. Yemi Fajirito is an assiduous lawyer, and he's a researcher and a good litigator. And one of his practice areas is human rights protection as well, and as regards human child's rights in Nigeria too, and in Africa. Now, Mr. Yemi, I need you to speak to the issue of, if you look at Section 38 of the 1999 Constitution that guarantees the right of everyone to religion. Now, just opposing that, even I think it's sub 3, Section 38 sub 2 rather, that says that parents has that right. It guarantees the right of parents to determine the religious instruction that will be given to their children. Now, in just opposing that with the right of the states to determine the kind of education that will be given to children. So how can we balance this? Because Almajiri system prioritizes Islamic learning. Everybody knows that Islamic philosophy, learning Islamic philosophies, Islamic principles, and all, which is good, and everyone has the right to his or her own religion. Now, the states, we clamoring for they being engaged also in secular learning. It's saying that, okay, yes, your Islamic learning is good, but we need you to also learn the Western education and all that. So how can we balance this? Because a parent can bring up an argument to say that, okay, I don't want my child to learn any Western to be enrolled in a Western school. I want my child to only know Islamic education, and that is it. So how can the states balance that area in ensuring that these children will not be left out at the end of the day? Because the world is progressing, the world is advancing, but the curriculum of the Almajiri system, I don't think, as it is today, in fact, it's obvious apparently, cannot meet, what how the world is moving so fast. So how can we balance the right of the state to determine the minimum education, the minimum standard of education, and that of the parent to also say the kind of instruction they want their children to learn? How can we balance that, Mr. Yemi? Thank you.
All right. All right. Very well. Thank you very much for the opportunity. When we talk about balancing the right of the parents as regards the provision of the Constitution, Section 38, and as well as the right of the state in determining the kind of education to be given to the children, it's, it's really an issue that must be carefully addressed in the same religion to freedom of religion. And in that case, rights, the government cannot force education to give the children. The government can only be a part. It's more or less the two of them working together. It's a kind of partnership between the government and the parents, because in one hand, the constitution has provided the right to the parents, as seen in section 38. Also, the constitution has gone ahead to provide, knowing fully well that the constitution is the ground norm, the norm upon which all other norms are predicated. So the implication of that is that it seems as though the parents really have more power in determining the kind of education to give their children. However, the government being in charge of the facility, like the well-being of the state, the citizenry, the government must ensure that it contributes its own quota. The government must ensure that there are things in place to ensure that the Almajiri education being given, or any kind of education being given, must still meet up with the present day realities. I'm being careful here. If the Almajiri education is such kind of religious education, is such that is not in tune with the present day realities. Take, for instance, the technology, the technological advancement that we have in the world, courtesy of the COVID-19, we all see, and we could even have this seminar courtesy of technology. People from India, we've seen that. So if any religious educational system is such that is not in tune with the present day realities, the government being like the overall supervising body can come in and contribute and say, oh, you must meet this standard. It's true you want to teach them based on your religious gathering. It's true they have the right to freedom of religion. However, certain things must not be left out. Certain things that are in line with the present day realities must be considered, must be infused into what being taught. So I believe the way we could balance is for the government to see that, oh, yes, the parents have this awesome right. The parents have this, inalienable right to freedom of religion for their children, truly. But they are the supervising body, the government. The people of Nigeria, from the constitution, we see that donated a great deal of power through the constitution to the government. We, the people of Nigeria, so the government, through the constitution, people, the social theory we all know, the Thomas Hobbes social theory, we've donated power to the government. So the government cannot be left out. The government will play its supervisory role, its regulatory role in ensuring that the teachings and the are infused into the teaching. And I don't know if I'm able to do justice to the question. If you have another clarification questions you want to ask in line of that, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yemi Badrito. That was insightful as well. Thank you very much. Before some of our participants are actually asking some questions, but before we go into those questions, I just quickly want Mr. Kolose to speak to this particular issue. Two things, and based on his presentation, anyway. Looking at the issue of justiciability now of the right to education, because our constitution is our ground norm, and by virtue of our section 66C says that chapter 2, which has that, something that has to do with the right to education is non-justiciable. That is somebody cannot go to court to say, oh, the government has violated my right to education and all that. Although there have been decisions of the courts, at the ECOWAS court, even at our own national court here. I know there was a time that Sarah took the federal government to court to as regards this right to education, and the ECOWAS court held that every Nigerian has the right to education and that the right to education is justiciable. Also, at the federal court too, it has been held too that the right to education is justiciable. But despite this, we still have that deficient in the implementation that an average person in Nigeria should be able to, have the benefits. Apart from the legislations, we even have judicial decisions affirming that every child has the right to education and every child should be given the access to education. So, what are the issues that we have the legal framework, we have the judicial decisions on which we can stand on, and despite all this, we still have this class of children being denied this right to education, being and not being in school. So what exactly are the maybe 2 or 3 things that you can point to that if we can address these 2 or 3 things, we should be able to make a headway? Can you speak to that, Mr. Kolise?
All right, thank you so much for your question. I just want to say that we don't even have to identify 2 or 3 things. We can just identify, first of all, one issue, and that is the lack of political will. The lack of political will, I would say, it's the principal problem in Nigeria. And I'll give an example with South Africa, for example. So South Africa only ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights just 3 years ago. But South Africa invests the international commitment quota, which is a particular percentage of about 9 or 12% to education. I think education is about the highest investment it makes, in every budgetary cycle. Now, but South Africa has been doing this before they ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Now, Nigeria ratified that covenant as far back as 1976 or thereabout. The right to education is guaranteed by that covenant. Nigeria also ratified the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, like I've said, and has domesticated. Nigeria is the only country that domesticated that charter in Africa, hook, line, and sinker. It didn't utter one word. And that is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights Ratification Enforcement Act, which I have on the screen if you would like to show that. So the problem really is Nigeria is quick to subscribe to treaties. So if you can see my mouse pointer, this is the law here. Nigeria is quick to ratify treaties and also to domesticate, but lacks fundamentally the political will to implement. So the issue. So if you want to take the political will as one, it's one aspect of the fulcrum. The other complementary aspect is implementation. Where there is a will, there will definitely be implementation. So Nigeria, I think mentally, our leaders think that because the right to education is not contained in Chapter 4 of the Constitution, then it is not justiciable. But that is not true. That is absolutely not true. The international commitment, by virtue of ratification, creates an international obligation on the part of Nigeria to implement domestically, even without a domestic law. But Nigeria would tell you that it's a dualist state. So a dualist state is a state that does not just apply international law. It has to, first of all, pass a local enactment, allowing the government to act on that local enactment. So that is what we call domestication. The African Charter Ratification and Enforcement Act on the screen is an effective domestication of the right to education under Article 17, Sub-Article 1. It says every individual shall have a right to education. When you add that complementarily with the provision of Section 15 of the Child Rights Act 1 of 2003, you have effectively a very strong legal weapon of which can be enforced in our courts. So one is our leaders are not aware that there is a law that's binding on not just the people, the law is binding in the sense that it confers rights. It's your rights. It's already protected by law that you have a right to education. And if you've not been educated by government, you can actually sue. But how many lawsuits do we have? Maybe one or twice. Nigeria is the most populous country on the continent, but it has the fewest cases in this area. So it also shows that there is a lack of ignorance. But of course, you cannot be knowledgeable about your rights when we're talking about the same lack of education, right? So right now, the principal obligation is on the side of government, the obligation to implement socioeconomic rights. But I will tell you one gray area when it comes to socioeconomic rights. That gray area is the issue of progressive realization. So like, unlike civil and political rights, socioeconomic rights are not, as a matter of course, enforceable, just like that. So for example, you have 209 million Nigerians in the year 2020. 209 million Nigerians cannot knock at the door of government to say that every one of us needs a house and that there is an obligation for you to build houses for us. No, the law says that the obligation of government is to progressively realize these rights. But the obligation on the part of government is that there must be some commitments. There must be, a periodic commitment over time to progressively realize. So for example, if you're going to need to build, say, 20 schools in a neighborhood, say in the northern part of Nigeria, we know that the government is broke, right? The government cannot say because it's broke, it's not going to build any school at all. It's supposed to begin to enact and possibly have a 10-year or 20-year plan to say that, okay, we have to build 20 schools. And by that time, the population would also increase. So we're looking at 30 schools. But this is what we're going to be building every year until we're able to get everyone in that particular neighborhood at school. So that is what progressive realization is about. So even though it has always given government a canopy or a cover to evade its obligations, it's really not a canopy or cover to evade its obligation. It only gives government a breathing space to be able to practicably implement its obligations. So to cut the long answer short, there is no political will in Nigeria. There is poor budgetary planning. And I think there's CIRAP and the CIRAP. CIRAP is doing a good job bringing this to the public glare by constantly challenging government on corruption issues and by constantly challenging government on socioeconomic issues such as right to education, right to housing, right to water, right to sanitation, right to health. These are very fundamental issues. And I think CIRAP is one of the major organizations. I don't want to say it's the only one, but it's one of the major organizations actually taking government to task. We need now to begin to push the attention of government to these laws and not just international law anymore. We have these laws in Nigeria. We need to begin to write articles about them, write letters on access to information, ask your senator, ask the House of Reps member, what is he doing to implement this right at the National Assembly? Ask the local government chairman. This budget was made for the rights for education, to build so and so school. What have you done with it? We need to begin to ask those questions in a very, very fundamental way. So I think until we address these issues, we're just joking about these rights. And I would tell you that I really worry for Nigeria because we are going down in so many ways. We're just going down in so many ways. Look at this record, for example. If we're having 28% of out-of-school children in 2007, what went wrong? How can we allow? We're supposed to be decreasing the situation over time. So it just means that our developmental plans has no impact. We just have plans on paper. Countries like South Africa, for example, they actually tell you this is what we've had. We're not meeting our targets, but look at the progress we're making. Look at the progress we're making. So that's the problem. And I think that until we address it from a normative and institutional standpoint, we're not really going to go anywhere. So one aspect of that, and I'm going to wrap up here, is at the state level, we need to push states to domesticate, because civil society actors like you and the lady from UK, I didn't see the name, but I know it's a well something. Civil society actors want to be able to hold government to account. But at the domestic level now, civil society actors who are engaged on the right to education cannot really hold government to task because those laws are not there. So we need to start from there. We need to start from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okolese. And one important point that you mentioned is the part of engaging the government, and the people that are in charge of these things in ensuring that every child, has that right and enjoys that right to education. And most importantly, because one of the things I found out is that most engagements focus on the central government. Do you understand? Leaving out the states and the local government. Because even looking at the framework as we have it, the state governments even have major roles to play when it comes to children education. But most times I found out that not very few people are actually asking the states, what exactly are you guys doing? What have you done? So going forward is not, people need to know that it's not only the federal government that has the responsibility to ensure that children have access to education, quality education. The states also, in fact, they have major roles to play. The reason why it is very, very minute in the north is because most of them have not even, they've not domesticated the Child Rights Act, and because of some other issues too. So that's to tell us that the state government have, they have major roles to play, in ensuring that every child has the right to education. And I am hopeful that going forward from this discussion, with the players at the local level, will begin to engage the government in that regard. Now, let me quickly go to one of the questions asked by um, one of the participants. Mr. Yemi, I'm directing the question to you. So this person, Nadia, she's asking that as our school is based in rural area, we we want to include agriculture as part of school curriculum. She's asking how can that be implemented? That's one question. Then the second one, she asks also that we also want to include parents and the community engagement to encourage children to remain in school. What are the challenges and the right way of doing this? In 2 minutes, can you quickly speak to those two questions? Thank you, Mr. Fajito.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As regards the first question, including agriculture in the curriculum, it's a very simple thing. What happens through the instrumentality of the law, through the policy, the educational policy of the government, either at the state level, the local government level, we have it included that agriculture will be part of the curriculum. You have it at the level practical to be done, and of course, bringing in more hands in teaching them the agriculture. You could have more spaces. You have farms, farmlands for each of the school. It may not be on the school premises itself. It may be a place separately for them to make use of, either for the practical sessions and the like. So I think that's a very easy thing. It's very easy. It's just through the instrumentality of law, the policy will be made, the regulation will be made to address that. And as regards the other question, engaging the parents and I mean, the parents and the government as to and of course through that during the registration process, the procedure, the details of the parent being gotten, and schools normally do have parent teachers association, the institutions, secondary schools should be in the parents will be I allowed a little network
Oh, I
glitch.
think
Can we
we've
hear me?
lost Fajita.
I'm back. I'm back. Can we hear me, please? I had a little
Well, in the
network glitch.
meantime,
Hello.
Yes, you can proceed. I can hear you.
network.
All right. Very well. So as I was saying, the parent engagement in the whole issue is also easy. Like we used to have while I was in secondary school, we had what we call parent-teacher association, where the parents will come, they have meeting at a particular time of the term. They have meetings, with the and also bringing that to university level, tertiary institutions level. It also can be achieved because at the point of registering students in school, the parents, the guardian or the parents' details will be dropped down, will be taken, and then they can always communicate with them. Another thing we used to have then while we were in secondary school, we have what we call the open days, where the parents will come, the teachers, the school authorities will give them feedback about their children and the like. So I
I think
believe
we lost Mr. Yemi, Mr. Fajita.
I'm
I can
here.
actually hear you. I can hear you.
All right. So
Well,
as I as I was saying, we could have open days for them and other things in this manner that would ensure the parents coming in contact with the school authority regularly. This, I believe, would help them in participating and engaging better than before. And that's what I have to say. I believe I've answered the questions.
Absolutely. So thank you for your answer. While we're waiting for Tosin to join us, I just wanted to say that one important way. Okay, I can see there's a question.
That's for you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so there's a question to me asking what is the rationale of bringing in the issue of the over 300 students that were abducted. So the context within which I brought that was the issue of insecurity. So when you're talking about the right to education, you cannot look at it independently of other rights. Children need to be able to exercise their right to education in a safe and conducive environment. This means that not only should governments provide adequate infrastructure for the purpose of education, but also they must ensure that the environment is safe. So where kids are constantly harassed, so for example, the kidnapping of the over 294 girls in Chibok in 2014 is already demoralizing for kids in northern Nigeria. Now having many other kidnappings, and with the recent one, over 300, and government does not know what to do about it. That is also very disconcerting for parents. It's very unsafe for kids who might genuinely want to study, but have to think about the possibility of being kidnapped. So that's the context within which I brought it. It's not really to make the issue of insecurity controversial, but it's just to buttress the point on the connection between insecurity or security and the rights of children to education. So you cannot really have that right exercised if there's insecurity. If you have, for example, if you're a parent asking this question and you have to easily drop your kids at school every day, but you know that in the neighborhood that kids have been kidnapped, that already gives you some uneasiness. Then you can imagine for children how traumatizing when they know that their friends have been kidnapped, or their neighbors have been kidnapped. That is very traumatizing for students, and it impacts on the rights, on their rights to education. So even if they are going to school, even the southern kids, I can assure you that the kidnapping of northern kids can impact negatively on kids that think they are in a safe neighborhood. We might think they're in a safe neighborhood, but them seeing that their colleagues in other parts of the country have been kidnapped can also have a psychological impact on their minds. And those are things that I think we shouldn't take lightly. So government's investments in the area of education should not be just to build the infrastructure, which is also important, but it's also to provide adequate security. So you have to complement both, just to ensure that the right to adequate education of kids is guaranteed.
And I think there's an additional question that Ibrahim asked. You can actually check the screen again. There's an additional question there.
The federal government has already put in place in integrating Quranic education with Western education under the BESDA program. Yes, that is true. So I didn't talk about the era from Goodluck, but I know there's been efforts even before Goodluck. But Goodluck is about the president. He's actually done even more for the Almajiri system, and he's trying to integrate the Almajiri system into the formal education system. And he invested, I think, more than 15 billion naira into that project. So, I mean, the federal government has already put that in place. But you see, I've just answered a bit of your question now. If you invest in building critical infrastructure, which is very, very foundational and fundamental, but there is no security, you're also adversely impacting on the rights of kids to learn at school. So if you look at my cover page, I put a picture of me there. It was not for show. I did serve in the northern part of Nigeria, so I'm just going to display that quickly. And while I was there, there was kidnappings, and I actually was almost killed. Tosin is aware of this. So I've dealt directly with Almajiri because there's an Islamic school just right next to my house. There was an Islamic school right next to my house in Gombe State. I understand how the system works, and I think that the federal government is not doing enough in terms of security. The federal government is not doing enough in terms of securing schools for children to be able to learn in a safe and conducive environment. And that is something that I think the federal government is fundamentally lacking. What we have now is that the bandits or terrorists can easily go to any school unimpeded, no resistance, no threats on the part of the state. The state is supposed to have a monopoly of violence. Right now, there is no resistance. And you have large numbers of people, human beings, being kidnapped like they're chicken. It's not even easy for a thief to go to a poultry to go steal 300 chickens. But here you have human beings being stolen, kidnapped just like that. No resistance on the part of government. So it's traumatizing. And I think that even if the federal government has a policy on paper, we always have good policies in Nigeria. We have good laws in Nigeria. The problem has never really been our laws or policies. The problem has always been implementation. It has always been the leaders. The leadership is very bad. The leadership is very poor. And we're not doing enough to ensure that even if our leaders are trying in their own bit, the standard of leadership that they're giving us is not good enough. It's not good enough. So even if the kids are returned tomorrow, there is still a threat. And that threat, if a child begins to think about it, it could be traumatizing. We don't even have counseling at schools. For example, we don't have counseling at schools. We're supposed to have counseling at schools. We're supposed to have psychologists at schools. Whenever you have these things, we're supposed to speak to our students. And we're supposed to even have the counseling all over the country. Even when something happens in a distant place, we're supposed to be counseling people that are far off, but that might have heard about these things in news. These things impact the growth of children. They also impact their appreciation of society and what their potential role in society is going to be. So we need to correct these things and always assure students that, especially our children, that they are going to grow up in a safe and conducive environment, and that they're going to have the opportunity, like our laws have said, that where they can actually fulfill their potential to the fullest extent. Until we're able to actually give assurances to kids in this way, I don't think that we're doing enough. So it is within that context that I would say that I've answered your question, and I think the government can do more.
Very well, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for that clarification. We will be rounding off soon because we don't have all the time. I wish we can have more time because it's actually very engaging, as this is an issue that touches almost everyone. But before we go, I would like to ask Mr. Fajirito, what are your thoughts, your final thoughts on the way forward? It has been highlighted, but on maybe you have something that you want to add to what has been said in terms of how we need to make these policies and laws come to life. We want to see them come to life. We have them in books fine, but we want to see them come to life. And how they will come to life is where every child, we can see that children, all every child, has that access to education and is in school, and is being educated. That is how we want it to come to life. So, what are your thoughts on your final thoughts on the topic as we round up this session? Thank you.
I think unfortunately Mr. Yemi is not at the backstage again. So maybe the network. Okay, I think
Oh,
he's
okay.
coming on right now. Let me quickly bring him on so that he will respond to the question. I don't know if he got the question.
Okay.
Mr. Yemi, did you get the question that Tosin asked right now?
I didn't get the question. My network tripped.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So
I'll
Tosin, you
repeat
can
it.
go ahead.
Okay. Well, then in rounding off my question is that in rounding off this session, because we don't have all the time. I wish we do have all the time anyway.
Okay.
What are your final thoughts on ensuring that the principles that we have, the policies, the laws come to life, and coming to life in the sense that every child, irrespective of the circumstance of the family the child, is found or finds himself, every child is in school in Nigeria. Every child has access to that basic standard education. So, what are your thoughts on how to ensure that our policies, our laws, as we have them, come alive? In that regard. Your final thoughts in 1 minute. Thank you.
All right. That will have a lot to do with the political will of the government. And also, part of the things that would help in achieving this, we have the right to education in the chapter 2, the non-justiciable provision of the Constitution. This can be brought out and put amongst the right we have in the chapter 4 and make it a fundamental human right. Another part could be is the issue of the penalty for the failure of either the parents or even the school in attaining the regulatory injunctions being put in place by the government, so that that could serve as a deterrence, that could serve as ensuring that others learn from those who have been punished, learn from those who have been, in any, they must be answered. Question will be asked and they must be answered. You see, so where the question is being asked and somebody is found responsible should be dealt with. If the parent, and of course, it's not easy, truly, because we know that the issue of the education being met, the issue of the standard of living of the parent will come into place. So it's not really easy. The standard of living of parents, the government must ensure that the standard of living is met. I mean, something is done to address that before we can even hold the parents responsible for failing in ensuring that the children or their child, their words, have basic education. But like I said, the political will of the government ensuring that right to education is transcend just being part of the non-justiciable issue, should become a fundamental human right. I believe this would go a long way. I believe this would go a long way. Hello?
I
Can
think
Oluwatosin hear me?
Tosin's network has gone bad
Okay.
again. So, but
The
we'll
Nigerian
try
situation.
to we'll try to round off from here. So,
Okay.
Chairman, thank you for the time. Um, yeah, and you've actually done a great job. And Mr. Yemi, it's
You're
been
welcome.
a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very
So
much. Thank
I
you.
think Nadia asked and Ibrahim asked that could they have the presentation of that means chairman, that your presentation they want to have the slides. Would you be
Absolutely.
gracious enough
I
to
will
make it
definitely
available?
send it across.
All right. So by the time you send it across to us, we'll try to share it with them.
Very well.
So yeah. So okay. Tosin is back. So Tosin, I think you should do the final roundup before your network comes in calling again. Yeah. Oh.
Very well. Very well. I just want even to ask the chairman the final thoughts on the. I really I'm so grateful for your contribution today. So, what are your final thoughts? This, like I said, that this is not a one-off thing. It's a continuous until we see our aims and objectives being achieved. We won't stop talking about this. So that's basically. So, Mr. Chairman, your final thoughts.
Thank you so much, Tosin, for having me, and thank you, everyone. Yemi, thank you for your insightful thoughts as well. My final thought really would be that civil society has a very important role to play, and I would engage my final thought from that angle. One is that civil society needs to have an effective strategy to engage governments. I know Nigeria is one of the very few countries on the continent that has a very vibrant civil society. But I think that our civil society really does not have a very effective monitoring and evaluation system to track their impacts on government policies. So my position would be that civil society need to have a targeted approach to engage governments. They need to, so for example, the right of the child to education. How should civil society organizations or non-governmental organizations engage on children's rights, engage on the issue? How should they engage on the issue? I would say that they cannot, I don't expect civil society to be able to have an impact in the 36 states of the Federation. If an organization is based in Lagos, based in Abuja, is based in Sokoto, or based in Edo State, they should actually engage with the governments where they are. And they should engage from a very, very informed position. That is, they should track the activities of government, they should track the budgets, they should have an engagement strategy with key people like the minister or commissioner of education. They should engage these people. Even in the process of developing the budget, they should participate in the process, because by doing so, there will be transparency to ensure that if you invest 10 billion naira into education, that 10 billion is actually used and it has the impact of realizing children's rights. There's no point investing 10 billion if it's not going to have an impact. That is just a waste, and it's most likely going to be stolen if there is no accountability. So civil society has a very important role to play to track the way resources are being budgeted and being used, and to engage government critically as a stakeholder. Civil society means they're part of the civilian population, they're part of the civilian society. So they have every right to these things. They have a right to insist on their FOIs, so they can actually seek information through the FOIs. They can actually use that information to undertake advocacy campaigns on particular issues on children's rights. They can use FOIs to engage governments, and they can use FOIs to actually empower kids and parents. When you know that government is going to be budgeting this amount, either for scholarships, you need to inform the community as well that, look, there's actually an amount that will not be used if nobody applies for scholarships, or challenge government that a particular amount has been budgeted for scholarships and it's not being used. So I think we can look at it from that angle to actually achieve an impact on the ground. That is one impact. But also, I think all of us need to do our bits. We need to educate our kids on their rights. We don't need to always expose kids to schools, because schools will not give them the best. As a parent, we need to educate kids as their first contact points in the socialization process. Educate them on their rights from the home. You know, at churches, if you participate in a church or in a mosque, you need to educate your kids at that level as well, or the kids at that level under your guardianship. We need to do so. That way, we begin to build a vibrant society that actually empowers kids and that actually respects and is devoted to the realization of the rights of the child to education. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it seems we lost Tosin again, the network. So, but thank you, everyone that has actually been part of this. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Mr. Yemi, we really, really appreciate your
You're
time to
welcome.
do this
You're welcome.
presentation. Subsequently, we'll be organizing, like Oluwatosin was saying, other events like this and other discussions. And now we treated more of the legal and policy and more today, but subsequently we'll also be talking about the education perspective, and most likely we'll be getting people from multinational organizations, intergovernmental organizations, to come and talk about what they are doing in terms of the education perspective of out of school children, the Almajiri. And you made mention of Edo Best. I know about Edo Best. I know a couple of people in Edo state government education board doing stuff like that. So we will still bring them on, and then we'll see how all of this can actually be well integrated to, because it has to be a holistic approach. So when we consider that holistic approach, that's when we can actually start to look at how the out of school children will consistently be driven down low to the barest minimum. We need to do that. Everybody, all hands must be on deck for that. So, Tosin, your final words so that you finalize everything.
Very well. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for today. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman Okoilese. I really appreciate your obliging us, your attendance today. Thank you so much. I'm thankful, as in I'm so grateful for the opportunity to tap from your wealth of knowledge in human rights, international human rights law. Thank you so much, Mr. Yemi Fajirito. Thank you so much too. We thank you for your. Although it came at a very short period, a short notice, I am rather, but you still made it worthwhile. Thank you so much. Basically, the most important thing we need to bear in mind that children, irrespective of the circumstances they find themselves, irrespective of the family they found themselves, irrespective of the circumstances, irrespective of the environment, they must, develop to their full potential. That is the aim. That is the goal. And thank God, goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations actually speak to that every child should have education. And by 2030, we want to see that by that time, every child indeed in Nigeria, in Africa, all over the world, is enjoying that right to education, because education is so important. It's helps even a citizen to engage with whatsoever is going on in his or her environment. So it's key to anybody's survival. That's the way my education is very key. It's like without education, I don't know how somebody can gainfully, engage other people in discussions, in political discourse and all that, in order to better his or her life or the life of his or her neighbors. So in view of that, also want to emphasize the role of every level of government that we have. Every level of government, and I repeat, every level of government. What I've found out over the years is the attention usually is on the federal government. The federal government, anything that goes wrong is the federal government. But we need to, add to it that yes, the federal government has, its responsibilities when it has to do with children. However, even the state government, even to the local government today have primary schools that they manage and all that. So it concerns every level of government. So the discussion, the engagement with government shouldn't stop at the federal government. The state government must be held accountable. The local governments must be held accountable. What are they doing with the resources given to them in ensuring that children in their at their disposal, have are benefiting from whatsoever they said they will benefit from as regards education and even their total well-being. Then second, like Mr. Chairman mentioned, civil society. That's why in our engagement, we should not just leave some parts and focus on some parts. Every everybody's hands must be on deck. Everybody must be involved in this thing. And I'm so grateful that at least the issue of whether justiciability or the rights of the right to education has been settled. So now, and thank God that there are legislations that actually guarantee this right. So it means that since there are legislations, then these legislations must come to life. People, our children must enjoy. It's not about every child is your child, whether they are your biological children or not. That has been our principle. That has been our philosophy. Every child is because they are the future, and we have to take care of them today. So I'm so grateful. This is not a one-off thing. This discussion continues because this will be reduced into writing in order for us to be able to take some strategic step in ensuring that we engage the right people, we engage the right institutions, and to make sure that things are done properly, and that our children are in schools and all that, and the reforms that we want to see, we're speaking to them and bringing them to life. So I know some people may still have further questions. You can still reach us on our social media platforms. We have further questions and all. And I'm grateful for you participating in today's discussion. It's something that it's very worthwhile. I've really learned myself, and it's like it has ignited further work for me in that regard, and for us to see that the right to education of everyone is guaranteed, protected, and realized. Yes, realized is the word, realized. So I'm so grateful to everyone that's come, to be a part of this event, this discussion, and we'll do like a kind of part two. But by then, I'm hopeful that by then we can be able to say from the last discussion, these are the things we've done, over time. Then before this discussion, then these are the challenges we faced. Then let's take it up from there to another level till we get to where we want to be, till we get to what we want to see, till we realize it. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Okolise. Thank you, Mr. Fajiriton. Thank you, all the
You're welcome.
participants. Thank you so much. I'm grateful, Mr. Okewale. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. Thank you so much. And we will see again after today in further discussions by the grace of God. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Very well. Thank you.